HR employees of Reddit. What was the most ridiculous, hilarious complaint you ever received? Was once asked to investigate a harassment situation where three different women were coming onto a male coworker throughout their shift. I took down the details, got the names, easy peasy investigation, so I thought. A week later, nobody by these descriptions or names had ever worked for the company. I decided to talk to the gentleman again. After a lengthy conversation where things didn't quite stack up, I asked him how these women communicated with him. I crap you not. With a straight face, he looks me in the eye and replies telepathically, like I'm some kind of idiot. I had never sent an employee for psychological evaluation up to that point, and I hope never to have to again. So yeah, I was asked by a delusional schizophrenic to conduct a sex harassment investigation on the voices in his head. Story 2. HR consultant for 10 plus years. You won't believe the amount of times I've had to shut people down for trying to sell their pyramid scheme side hustle in the office. Story 3. I was a manager and had to call our HR in on this one. We had a computer that was used by multiple people, and a couple of girls complained that it had a virus, and adult film was always popping up when they turned it on in the morning. I decided to have looks see if someone was ducking around on the closing shift, so I looked at the security footage and and behold, one of the supervisors was watching adult film and pleasure himself. When we called him in, he didn't deny it, but said technically he didn't pull his junk out, he just played with it in his pants. So it's not really that bad. The HR guy just looked at him, didn't say a word until after what seemed like forever, the idiot said. So I guess I'm fired, and then walked out. Story 4. My work has one men's toilet. Had one coworker complain that another guy kept using the bathroom before him and doing big old poos. But the way he said it was like, this guy knew when he was about to go, ninjas in just before him, dropped a massive stinker, and then forced the other guy to marinate in the smell when he went for a leak afterwards. We ended up adding a can of air freshener to the bathroom, and the next complaint that came in was the poo guy never used. Story 5. I'm not in HR, but someone called HR on me. I work with a few people that aren't that fluent in English. One of my coworkers was trying to explain to me what kind of tacos he ate and could not remember the word for stingrays. So he took my notebook and drew a picture of a stingrays and wrote the word turtle. So it looked like this: crudely drawn stingray, the word turtle. A lady I work with went through my notebook, saw the picture of the stingray plus the word turtle. She called HR because she thought I was writing notes about her in my notebook. She said that horribly drawn stingray plus the word turtle meant that I want to punch her in the face because she is slow like a turtle. Definitely a reach. I didn't get in trouble, I was just told by my boss that I'm not allowed to talk about turtles anymore in case it upsets her. I rarely talk about turtles, so this isn't really a problem for me. Story 6. I told my coworker as professionally as I could that it wasn't appropriate for her to be using her phone while at work, teaching kids, supposedly. She spent all her time on Facebook. Little kids would be screaming and wailing on each other literally 10 feet away, and she was totally oblivious. She complained by email to HR that I was rude and confrontational. They pulled me aside and told me to be more careful about how I spoke to coworkers. I told them my side of the story. They spoke to her again. She got a written warning. They didn't tell me what happened, but I gathered from office gossip that she lost her crap and started shouting at the HR staff. Rude and confrontational, perhaps? Anyway, she's on her final warning now, and she has a habit of hitting on the married dads of our kids, involving children in adult matters. Why hasn't your mummy paid your fees yet? Don't you want to come to daycare? And generally being an UN professional self-absorbed pitta, so can't wait until she gets fired. Story 7. Not HR, but I have a story about an HR person that I will never forget. The company I worked for hired a new girl in the HR deputy. She was young and very enthusiastic. I'm sure this was probably her first job out of college. Cut to a week or so later, and I'm riding in the elevator on the way up to the executive floor, and she steps in with me. A couple floors later, we stop, and an older gentleman wearing a polo shirt and jeans gets on. Before I could greet him, she says, "Pretty casual for a work day, huh?" I had to stifle my laughter when he replied with, "That's one of the benefits of owning the company." She turned an amazing color of red that I haven't seen since. It was all in good fun, though. She ended up working there a long time. Story 8. Not HR, but my company is too small to have one, so it just falls on me. Used to have an AR clerk who would snack at her desk all day long. We are a pretty casual, laid-back company, so it's not a big deal as long as she was getting her work done. But then it escalated to having food constantly being delivered. Tacos in the morning, pizza at lunch, Chinese in the afternoon. It was bizarre and made it difficult for her to work when she's eating full meals all day. I was on the fence about saying something until she brought in an Instant Pot. She plugged it in and cooked a freaking pork roast at her desk, poured in BBQ sauce she brought, and ate on it all day. I was dumbfounded. It was so strange. I pulled her aside the next day and told her how unprofessional it was. She was shocked and told me I was being unfair because I never specifically said no one was allowed to bring in an Instant Pot. She truly seemed genuinely surprised that she wasn't allowed to do that. She scaled it down after that, but I sometimes wonder how much further she would have gone if I never said anything. Story 9. I was the complainer. My buddy was dating a girl that worked in HR at my company. Their relationship starting was totally unrelated to me. They had gone to college together. He dumped her, and she didn't take it well and started threatening my job since I was still friends with him. I lodged a complaint just through the main email, hrcomplaints@company.com or whatever it was. My complaint was assigned to guess who? I ended up having to independently schedule a meeting with the VP of HR because the regular reps and middle managers were protecting their rep rather than believing me. Story 10. My partner's in HR. Someone took a crap on the job site. He was given a photo complete with measurement. The people that complained wanted DNA testing done. He's still not sure why they measured it. Story 11. An employee used very derogatory terms to make fun of a customer who was in the back of the store, while talking to the customer who was at the counter, who happened to be the other customer's mother. Yikes. Story 12. You wouldn't believe the headaches that I received when management signed a new copier, Printerly, which reduced the overall number of printers in exchange for centrally located multiplex copiers. Evidently, people feel their social standing is signified by if they have a printer or two in their office. My favorite was an executive assistant who stated that because she wears heels to work, she couldn't walk to the new copier, and requested that a reasonable accommodation would be to replace the printer she had in her office. Story 13. Not an HR employee, but I recently reported a bus driver for bringing his girlfriend to work and rubbing her feet while driving. She sat on the spot right behind the driver and put her feet where he could reach for them with one hand. I took a picture of the whole thing and debated on what to do with it for a while. On the one side, I didn't want this guy to lose his job, nor have to explain why he was rubbing his girlfriend's feet at work. Imagine the awkwardness. On the other side, he missed a turn and then took a U-turn on a downhill blind curve where we could have easily gotten nailed. In the end, I came to the conclusion, when other people's lives are in your hands, that's what your hands should focus on. Story 14. I was the one being complained about. A patient had asked if it was okay to remove her IV fluids because she was going home. She was one of those people who was very convinced that if we took her fluids out, she would die. She was admitted for the common cold and uses her insurance to pay like this so she didn't have to spend a dime. Anyway, I told her that it's okay, ma'am. We're just running regular saline water through your IV, no more med. You can go home today and we can take that out. Get a notice from HR the next day saying I wasn't using proper medical terminology for IV fluids. HR didn't do crap. They just tossed the complaint at me without asking questions. Story 15. I worked in HR and my coworker hated me. She wanted someone else to get the job I did, and she would complain about me to management for anything. The final straw for everyone was when I sneezed, and she slammed her keyboard on her desk, basically ran out of the room, and didn't come back for 30 minutes. Management called me in and said I was making too much noise. I told them I sneezed, and they said she would complain about me every day, so they didn't believe her, but had to make it look like they were doing something. She left shortly after story 16. We had a complaint that the toilet roll holders were too low in the stalls because when a guy was taking a poo, his knees were hitting the holders. We then lifted all the stall's toilet roll holders 8 inches on whole company site, so no knees would hit the toilet roll holders. No complaints since. HR working for the people. Story 17. I recently had HR tell me that one of my staff had been undersupplied in his annual leave over the past few years, and he needed to take at least 10 days off over the next 6 months to correct the leave liability. Paid at a higher rate than usual to make up for the error, of course. He could take a 2-week block or, say, a day off a week until he'd use the leave. His choice. He was so enraged over being given extra paid holidays that he wrote to our general manager to complain, screamed at me, his boss, "I know my rights," refused the leave, or even to discuss why he wouldn't take it. Anyway, I wrote his performance review this week, and there are multiple goals about professional, respectful behavior that need to be reached in order for him to get a raise this year. Yeah, not so much. Oh, and he still has to take the 10 days off. Story 18. Not HR, but my friend who has recently told me about a VP at his company making a post on LinkedIn with one of the new employees as his WCW, Woman Crush Wednesday. The WCW lady was happy about it. The complaint came from 2 women who didn't get the promotion to that position. Story 19. I got shot in the eye with a Nerf dart, and insurance wouldn't cover it, so my dad brought me to the ER. Story 20. Not HR. Used to work on an order packing line for a large distributor. If we had an issue with any equipment on the line, we weren't permitted to correct it on our own. We were supposed to turn on a light similar to what you'd see over a cashier's line in a grocery store, and one of the leads would come over to see what was wrong and fix it. Suddenly, I have an issue with my printer, and since I already caught hell for not following procedure on it before, I figured I'd try to do as told so I didn't get my wrist slapped again. Go to turn my light on, and imagine that. It doesn't work either. Yelled the lead's name to get his attention, since we weren't supposed to wander away from the line either. Next day, I was called into HR for shouting the lead's name. One of the clowns on the line beside mine didn't approve of my shouting. Story 21. It was lunchtime. A client came in. My colleague was eating a sausage roll and had it on his desk. Next day, a formal complaint came through about my colleague's sausage roll and how unprofessional it was of him to have a sausage roll he was eating on his desk. Story 22. Not an HR rep, but I work in the produce department with this lazy POS. He will complain to HR about anything and everything. We had a new team lead start, and he's trying to get everyone to work a little harder, make a name for himself and whatnot. So one day, lazy POS is filling apples, but doesn't go through them or rotate. Team lead cones up and asks if he rotated, and POS says yes. Team lead asks, then why are there cold apples on top of warm ones? Newer apples obviously came from the cooler. Lazy POS literally drops the box in his hand and rushes upstairs to HR. He cries to HR at least once every other week. It's always about stupid stuff, so they never really tell him what he wants to hear. They just spend time listening to his problem and say they will talk to the people responsible. They never follow up because no one is going anything HR worthy besides him wasting company time. He was once on the sales floor digging for gold in his ear, and a customer wrote a complaint to corporate. He tried to go to HR about our manager for showing him the complaint and saying that his ear itched, and what was he supposed to do? They told him obviously go to the bathroom, itch, and then wash your hand. You're working with food. Not HR related, but this guy and I share the same name. He is the equivalent to a Walmart greeter because of how little work he gets done and how much talking he does. Many managers have tried to address this, but it's almost impossible to get fired where we work. He will get customer compliments every week. Some of them are literally word for word every week. The thing is, the ones that aren't the same wording are usually mine. We work in the same department, but I do different things than him. For every compliment we receive, we're supposed to get a $5 food coupon we can use in the store. I haven't received one of those in at least 4 or 5 years because he always says they're his. If I try to argue, he will literally look at the customer's name on the compliment form and say, "Oh, me and Andy have been friends for years. I know this one is for me." Story 23. My HR department once fell for a phishing email and sent everyone's W-2s to a random hacker. HR then informed everyone via a mass email with no read receipts at 9 p.m. on a Friday, even though multiple people were on vacation and had left instructions to be called in an emergency. When I got back from my trip a week later and expressed my concern about her not actually notifying me about this, she totally brushed it off. I said, "Do you realize that I need to freeze my credit and I'm 7 days late in doing so?" She said, "No, don't freeze your credit. You won't be able to use your credit cards if you do." Another time, during a workers' comp claim, I needed to speak to our claims adjuster, and she said, "An adjuster doesn't get assigned until after the claim is settled." That's the exact opposite of how that works. She was my stupid complaint. Story 24. Not really AM HR, but I worked in a coffee shop in a really well-off area. I heard a number of really odd complaints, and one guy even tried to punch our barista because the coffee was too slow because it was rush hour. But the most unreasonable was as follows. I was making a coffee for an older, late, maybe mid-60s. She told me to heat it to 95 degrees Celsius, 5 degrees Celsius off boiling point, which not only is insanely hot, but also against company policy as it actually ruins the coffee. I did it anyway, because I couldn't be bothered to fight with her. This lady actually came around to my side of the machine and watched as I made it. I finished the coffee and I went to put it on the side where all coffees go to put a lid on. Before I could, she intercepted my hand and spilled it all over her own hand. This coffee was ridiculously hot and must have hurt a fair bit. She then proceeded to scream at me that she was going to sue me in the company, to which I just said, "Go ahead, I have nothing." Story 25. There was one guy complaining that his coworker was mimicking his getup and personality, said that it's identity theft. Story 26. She came in with a complaint that she tried to give one of the younger guys a hug, and he refused. His story was that he basically had to run away. I had to explain to a middle-aged woman that it was not her right to hug people who didn't want to be hugged. She still didn't get it and left thinking she was still in the right. Story 27. I went to HR once to complain that my manager refused to give me a couple of vacation days. The HR lady reminded me about the boilerplate rule that vacation time must be mutually acceptable to the employee and the company. I then pulled out 6 more vacation requests that had all been denied, including one that was denied in writing for a reason that was not permitted. I asked her if the company is allowed to say that it's never acceptable. My last request was undenied. Story 28. She wanted to lodge a complaint against a colleague who had a new TV delivered to the office instead of home, and she thought her colleague's spending money on the TV was irresponsible. Story 29. I was the person complained about, and 2 decades later, I'm still salty about it. I got called into the HR manager's office one day and told that I was being written up for discussing inappropriate and sexual things in the office. I had never done that, ever. I was still a very much closeted gay boy at the time, so there wasn't a chance in hell I was going to talk about my sex life to the middle-aged women I worked with. Who complained about me? I asked, being young and naive. We can't tell you that. There's confidentiality rules, HR said. Okay, I understand. What was it that I supposedly said? We can't tell you that either. You may use that to discover who lodged the complaint. So, I'm being written up because an anonymous person complained that I was saying sexual things in the office, but you won't tell me who complained or what I supposedly said? That's right. Now, please sign this form to indicate that you understand the severity of your infraction. No, I won't do that. You have to. It was a stalemate for almost 20 minutes, while I refused to sign their form. They threatened to fire me, but I still refused to sign. In the end, she made some comment on the form about my unwillingness to participate in the process. Then, to top it off, the rest of the office wondered why I completely stopped speaking to all of them altogether. I refused to engage in any of the usual non-office related talk. If it was not 100% required conversation in order to do my job, I flat out ignored my coworker's presence. Again, I was called into HR and reprimanded for my abrasive demeanor. I quit that job shortly thereafter. Story 30. Not HR, but I talk to people, so I know a few stories. Here's my favorite in terms of how ridiculous it is. HR director found hookah in the women's bathroom. It wasn't hidden or anything, it was just there in the plain sight on the floor. Turns out one employee is addicted to smoking hookah, and she brought it on her first day of work. She then demanded to be allowed to smoke hookah in the bathroom, but they came to the agreement that she can take a break every day to go out and smoke it in the nearby hookah place if she wants to. Little background. I work in IT in Ukraine. IT specialists here make good money, and they are also spoiled as duck due to high demand. So people complain about all sorts of stupid crap all the time, like free lunches are served in containers they don't like, or elevator needs an AC and etc. Story 31. A woman claimed that people were spreading rumors about her sleeping with coworkers. The investigation wasn't even done yet when she moved in with one of the guys. The others showed me texts and nude pics she had sent them. And if that wasn't enough, she followed me home from the bar one night to make sure I was okay. I shut my door in her face and the next day said I was too drunk and didn't realize she was there. Had enough from everything else, I didn't even need to bring that part into the conversation with her supervisor. Story 32, not HR, but once I had a woman call in a complaint to customer relations at my hospital because I was rude when I kicked her and her husband out of her father-in-law's room for fighting with the guy's other son/wife. The sons were screaming at each other and up in each other's faces, and this woman was behind her husband, egging him on and shouting obscenities at her brother. When the rep brought that up, she said, well, he was rude about it and he should be in trouble. I was not in trouble. Story 33. I was called into HR a few years back. I was working at a machine and am known for having experience and knowledge of the factory. A female supervisor was trying to answer a question for one of the new people in the section. At some point, she waved to me and tried to get my attention. Since I was in the middle of a setup, I wasn't paying attention to her, rather making sure I wasn't cutting my fingers off while I set the punch and die in the machine. As I finished and pulled my hands away, I heard her call loudly to me, "Hey, old guy!" I think she thought she was being funny, as she was probably 20 or 25 years younger than I am. I looked up from my machine, looked right at her and asked, "Are you referring to me?" Her, "Yeah, where is blah 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 located? This guy needs whatever." Me, "It's down aisle 6, top shelf, fat ass." Once in HR and with a union rep sitting quietly in the corner, I didn't say anything as I was being counseled for being rude and disrespectful toward the new supervisor. The HR read the complaint to me and was surprised as I acted that way because I had no other black marks on my record in the 6 years at the company. The complaint neglected to say she referred to me as old guy. When asked why I said what I did, I said, I thought it was a new policy. She called me old guy, and I'm old, so I called her fat ass because she is fat. HR then called in the supervisor and the young lad she had with her at the time. She admitted she called me old guy, but said calling her a fat ass was way worse and out of line. HR dismissed the complaint, and the new kid and I were told to go back to work. We found the new supervisor was fired. The union rep demanded it, and HR agreed. Story 34. Someone complained about another employee smelling of rotten chicken and feet. The scent was bad enough that no one wanted to work with that guy around. Had to put on a hygiene fundamentals in the workplace presentation for that entire group, since I couldn't single out smelly. I think he got the hint, because he also got a haircut. Story 35, we had an employee walk out in the middle of third shift, leaving one person alone to do all the work. He came back a week later and asked us to write it up like he'd been let go, because he wanted to file unemployment. Obviously, we wouldn't do that. Story 36, was handed a handwritten letter from my boss, as he said, "I think you might need this." The letter had been written by an employee who let herself into the boss's office and left it on his desk while he was out, complaining she was unhappy about how the staff were mistreated and disrespected because he often left during the day to go shopping and get haircuts. This rarely happened, probably not even once a month, and that she thought it was appalling that he left for a week over Christmas to see his family, while they weren't allowed more than 3 days off over Christmas. Had a meeting with her and literally had to explain that he is the owner of the company and can come and go as he pleases, that he works evenings and weekends when others don't, and that the week off was the first time he had taken holiday in 8 months, unlike the rest of the staff who get 28 days throughout the year. She looked at me expressionless and said, "And I want a week off at Christmas. If he gets it, I should have it." I told her complaint had been logged and we'll look into it. She walked out, relayed a different version of our conversation to a dozen employees, and gossiped about the boss. She was gone within a month of the letter. Story 37. After 20 years in HR, I have too many to remember. The most recent was on Monday when an employee emailed me with a request to remind everyone to be careful with scented lotion. Her area reeked from something that smelled like Moroccan oil. These kind of emails are a bomb waiting to go off. Everyone gets paranoid and I end up replying to 50 people that they smell fine and yes, please keep wearing your deodorant. I told her that I would rather address it with the individual, so let me know who it was. After literally sniffing our way through the cube farm, we discovered the smell was coming from her own desk drawer. We couldn't find the stinky culprit, so she ended up throwing everything out. Case closed. Story 38. Not me, but one of my friends works as an Amazon customer chat rep. One time she got a complaint that a customer wanted to return a Funko Pop figure because they ended up getting the Chase variant instead of the regular variant. For those that aren't aware, some Funko Pops have a Chase variant, which is basically the same figure but with something added. For every 5 regular variants, 1 Chase variant gets produced. Story 39. Previous job. I worked with some huge asshole across the hall. I won't go into why he was an asshole, but one of the things he did was turn me into HR because I had a mini catapult on my desk, a desk toy that shot mini marshmallows. He claimed it was a weapon, and HR called me to clarify. When I told her what it was, she sighed and said if I took it home, she wouldn't make a case out of it, so I took it home. Story 40. Had a lot of people ask for more hours, I would tell them, I don't have more hours in your department, but I can give you hours in X department. Next schedule would come out, and they would say, I have too many hours. So I would give them like approximately 10 fewer hours with still 15 to 25 hours. And then it would be, I don't have enough hours. So then I would say, okay, remember that week when I gave you 30 to 35 hours and that was too much? And they would say, I want 35 hours. So I would try my best and usually end up with 30 hours because hours were slim. And then it would be, I have too many hours. And then I would stop talking to them because I was going crazy. Story 41. Not HR, but workers' comp. We just had an associate file a claim this week because they burnt their mouth on their lunch. A lunch they brought from home and heated up in the microwave. Story 42. Not HR, but I was on the management team at a 50-employee company. At our weekly management meeting, the production manager reported that he had a complaint from one of the male machinists that it was unfair that the ladies' toilet had a free tampon machine and the male toilets didn't. Apparently he had piles and he used tampons. Story 43. There was the balloon incident. The quality control manager in the customer relations department decided to come in early and put a balloon at the desk of every service rep who was taking above average call volume. Within 5 minutes of the start of the shift, one of our worst performing reps had complained that this was unfair. This is a union shop, so she filed a grievance that some reps got an unfair bonus in the form of a balloon. The union contract is clear that all reps have to be treated exactly equally. The rep that handles 110 calls per 480-minute shift and the rep who handles the absolute minimum number of calls and refers half of them to a supervisor are equal. The rep who filed the grievance got 30 minutes union business assigned that day, and that means that her call stats for that day did not count. She got a free day so she could handle less than the minimum, and she could claim that had she been on the phones for that 30 minutes, then she would have made her target. To solve the grievance, the manager had to give a balloon to everyone. This is the kind of thing that makes people hate union. Story 44. I was once summoned to HR. When I got there, One of my employees was already sitting in the head HR lady's office with a "what the heck" really look on his face. HR lady goes into a diatribe about how this employee is a chauvinistic pig that doesn't respect women and thinks he is better than all women. On and on about just how awful this guy is. Employee was my lead software dev and was awesome at his job and a great guy otherwise. Turns out, HR lady had asked him to write a spreadsheet full of formulas to calculate open enrollment dollar values for withholding based on all the available options and individual pay rates. He told her that, "I can help, but I've got this payment gateway project that's due and don't really have a ton of time. Can I just show you how to get started instead?" And that's how the argument started. My response was, "Okay, employee, you can leave. Thank you." Then I told her that if Excel didn't open, that's it, custom sheets with formulas and pay data for employees, that's HR, and that I could recommend some resources for learning Excel. That Karen was constantly trying to get IT to do her job for her. Story 45. Not HR, but a complaint raised against me. Hostile and unfriendly behavior. I had to explain to the head of HR that the complainant had walked up behind me whilst I was relieving myself at a urinal, launching into a detailed explanation of their computer problem. Rather than say, "Shut the duck up, reboot your PC and leave me alone," I replied, "Please log a ticket for me." So yeah, prompting them to follow the proper procedure, never mind accosting me whilst urinating, was me being hostile. The complaint was promptly filed in the under-desk circular receptacle, Story 46. Obligatory, not HR, just a witness. I worked for an outsourced call center, so all we had for resources was what was provided by the client. A customer called in and had some documentation that conflicted with our info. The agent called a superior over and was explaining the situation, showing her where the discrepancy was in our training material. He was sitting the whole time. She was standing. He got referred to HR because he was aggressively wielding the 3-ring binder at her. I was in a raised seat a few rows over, so I was asked for my account. HR assured me it's completely confidential. They then interviewed another soupe and began their convo with, "What says happened was complete mischaracterization of my statement." So that was fun. There was also the time after my cat had passed. She was 22 and I'd had her the whole time, so I was not in a normal frame of mind. And I hugged a fellow female coworker I'd hung out with outside of work, and I asked her how her kitty was. She reported me for sexual harassment. I was pretty shocked. I was asked to meet with HR, so I explained my mental state, and that I'd been to her house and seen her cat, and so was asking after him. Once I said that, that was basically case closed. Would not recommend. Story 47. Not a HR employee here, but I've heard some stuff from various sources. Complaint 1. This was against a teacher in, let's say, a not very well-rated school. The person in question was extremely laid back, like this is the guy who gave me and a few others a lift back from a party. And when 2 of the others were about to beat the crap out of one another in the middle of the street, his response to "should we do something" was, "Maybe, but I say we just wait a bit, nothing will probably happen." The complaint was that he'd picked up and thrown a table at a student, then punched another student in the face. It was found to be false. Didn't stop the little craps trying complaints against more staff, including one of the, let's say, less academic students claiming a teacher threw him through a window, only for his claim to fall apart when asked to show the broken window. Complaint 2 told to me from someone who works in a factory as HR. My Spanish coworker stole my boots and threw them into the crusher, which sounds funny enough, except the Spanish coworker was called in to answer to the complaint, and his defense was that he hadn't thrown the guy's boots into the crusher because here were his boots, while the Spanish guy was standing there in just his socks. Story 48. I got a visit from HR. This was about 21 years ago. An email was going around the company that showed animated cartoon characters having sex. Sex positions, but no naughty bits were shown. Several were embedded in the email text. I saw the email on my reporting's computer as I walked by, and I ordered it deleted and not sent to anyone. It was too late by then, as it had gone out to a lot of people. HR got a complaint, and the company lawyer visited every person who received or saw the email to see if anyone was so offended that they needed mental health counseling. When she came to me, I just replied that I have the internet at home, and I am immune to being offended by adult film, and in fact, I have a picture of a woman having sex with a zebra, and the only thing wrong with it is that it is too blurry. I was also called by HR and ordered to retain all emails from a woman who works in HR. Seems that she had been caught in the act with another HR employee. She claimed that it wasn't what it looked like. Her male coworker was just under her desk looking for a pen that he had dropped. And another time I got called for HR for something that HR should have known better not to do. The head of HR told me that he needed to file a report showing our compliance with interviewing minority candidates. But the database was missing the race on a lot of people because when they applied, they didn't fill that out. So he had me open the raw data tables and go through it, filling out the races of job applicants based on their names. So anyone named Washington or who had a black-sounding first name like Shaniqua was just updated to black. Story 49. One gal had an obsession with mini muffins. She brought a 12-pack with her to work 3 to 4 times a week, never labeled them as hers, and frequently left them on the shared foods counter, where it's up for grabs to the whole staff. One day, someone who was newer accidentally ate one of the mini muffins. Pandemonium followed. There was screaming, tears, thrown pastries, threats of physical violence. I had to complete a report explaining that the scuffle ensued because another woman had violated her mini muffin. And the whole time, this woman is fuming and crying. Story 50. I wasn't the HR person. I was the chief technology officer for North America of one of the top 5 private national companies. I was stationed in NYC, and even the 15 or so people that I spoke with daily, the head database administrator, the network architect, internal and external network security people, weren't able to get to the floor my office was on. This is just to give you an idea of how the office/company was laid out. I'd have to go down, leave my ID with security, and bring the person up to my office. The head of the art department calls me and says he needs to talk with me. Okay, I go down and get him. His complaint? The system admins and the app development people made the bathroom smell. I just said, I hear you, and then took him back down. Story 51. So this is quite the tale, but I will try to keep it brief. 2 employees enter into a relationship and begin to go a bit above and beyond with PDAs. We're talking full-on over-the-clothes action here. In our workspace, the break room, on the floor of the locker room, against the wall outside, etc. Employees are asked to tone it down due to inappropriateness, etc. Proceed to accuse every manager of being homophobic, creating a toxic work environment, victimization, bullying, etc. Formal complaints abound. Turns out one of these employees has been threatening to hurt people, being generally aggressive and scary, etc. They both leave of their own accord before they can be managed out. Cut to a year later, one reapplies for a position in the company which is rejected on multiple genuine business grounds. Immediately receive a HR notification. They made a complaint that we wouldn't rehire them. Story 52. Once had to tell a guy a court order means the company cannot ignore it, regardless of how much he shouted at me or threatened to hurt me. I did genuinely look into it because it was the first I ever heard of anyone having money ordered by a court to be diverted. So our payroll team sent over the court order and session dates it all took place in. I asked our solicitors to look it up and see what went down, since it was all a matter of public record. Ends up our employee never bothered going to the court to contest the order and just ignored it. So armed with this knowledge, I brought him in and laid it all out. Initially, he listened and just sat and waited for me to finish. Then, after I'm done and explained nothing further can be done, nor can we amend the payment, he explodes at me, personally blaming me for all his problems and that he can't afford these payments. Finally, after listening to him shout at me for 10 minutes and blaming me for his problems, I dropped my professional demur and flat out told him that if he bothered to defend himself in court, as much as he fruitlessly was trying to do here, maybe he wouldn't be in this position. At that point, he threatened to hurt me, but shouted it loud enough that HR outside the meeting room heard it. My HR manager came in and just told him to leave and was fired on gross misconduct. At which point, he tried to swing a punch at my HR manager, who was an amateur boxer. He knocked the guy out, put him in the recovery position, and called 999 for an ambulance and police to attend our work. It was a most eventful HR meeting I ever had. Story 53. This employee is looking at me funny. Like, funny how? I don't know, but he needs to stop or I'm getting a lawyer. Research and find out they've never been in the same room. Story 54. We didn't have HR at the shop I worked at. Small companies generally don't here. Plus, it's retail, so nobody cares about workers' rights. But I was the union rep for my store, which is similar. I had a complaint from one of my colleagues who had requested a transfer to another store, and our manager laughed at her and refused her request when she told him why. Her reason behind wanting a transfer? I want to get a transfer to the countryside to get away from all the Syrians who are coming over on the boat. When I asked her, what boat? She replied, the Syrian boat with all the immigrants on. It was in the Sun. Horrible tabloid paper. Didn't you see it? She was in her 20s and not the brightest crayon in the box. I said I'd follow up her complaint, but knew it wouldn't go anywhere. She's still in the same store 4 years later, and that boat still hasn't arrived. Funny that. Story 55. I was helping with hiring in a small company, and someone applied for a driving position with us. Their CV looked promising, so I asked them to send a copy of their abstract, which showed that their license had been suspended a few days prior. I replied to his email to tell him that because he didn't have a valid license, we couldn't consider him for the position. But he kept calling and emailing, asking for a trial shift, and trying to get us to proceed with his application. Story 56. Complaint on me. When I was an HR generalist, I work in an industry where we can have a real problem with certain groups coming in and making trouble. Cough, animal rights groups cough. And I was doing all of the hiring for the location at the time. I had one lady come in for a tour of the facility as part of the pre-hiring screen. She was late, which automatically disqualified her from going, and I brought her into the office to inform her that I would be rescinding her tour offer. Cue a sob story about just getting off the bus from New York. I asked why she was coming all the way down here, and she said she was looking for a job after graduating college. I said, "Oh, congratulations. What was your degree?" And she said, "Criminal justice." These are all textbook red flags for hiring in my industry. So I documented everything, firmly told her, "I'm afraid that you were late, so you are unable to proceed with the hiring process at the time." She tries to argue with me, but I stay firm, escort her out. A few minutes later, she calls the HR number and gets me on the phone. She doesn't recognize my voice until I tell her the same, "Well, you were late." So she demands to be transferred up the line so she can complain about me. I send her to my boss, who had his door cracked listening to the entire conversation about her sob story, all the red flags, etc. I got an email that was sent all the way up to VPs saying what a good job I did handling a potential red flag. Story 57. Our director of HR just got fired and her position terminated. She was with the company for 30 years and had multiple discriminatory cases held against her. One case was from a driver for the company. He parked in the HR's parking spot, even though the company doesn't have reserved spaces. HR called the cops on him. Cops came and were shining flashlights in his car while he drove back to the warehouse in the company van. He stopped, got out, and asked the cops what the problem is. Cops, this your vehicle? Driver, yes, is there a problem? Cops, we received a call that this car was abandoned and needed to be towed. But since it's your car and you obviously work here, we'll be on our way. The cops then began to yell at HR for wasting their time and calling them out for a petty issue, all because the driver was black. This is just one case that was held against HR. Story 58, HR employee for a group of gaming servers got a 20 or 30-something girl come to me and complain about a player calling her a tit streamer, and she wanted me to launch a full-on investigation of every 10,000 players in the server and figure out who it was. Story 59. Very late to this party, but I can remember receiving a phone call from a woman loudly screaming into the phone how unfair it was that she couldn't use extended sick leave to get cosmetic breast augmentation surgery, going into immense detail about why she needed said surgery, and how her boss was a jealous Karen who couldn't deal with an underling having big breasts. I then transferred her to employee relations because I work in compensation. Story 60. When I worked as a manager at Walgreens, we got a complaint that was sent through the surveys that stated, "This Walgreens is a bunch of kids that smoke pot in the store and don't help customers because they are smoking. It smelt of it the moment I came in the store. I'm never going back there again. They are irresponsible and addicts." There was one day that a skunk came up to someone's car at night and sprayed it. Our store smelled terrible for months. I didn't let my son smoke at work. They would come in high but always covered up the smell because most of them didn't want our other boss to fire them. Story 61. I made the complaint. HR tried their best. It was one of my first weekend shifts at my full-time job, library work. It was my supervisor and I opening, and others would join us once we opened. I have an allergy to cats and a particular ingredient in perfumes. All employees were told, and I asked that they check their bottles and let me know if they were wearing this ingredient so I could take the appropriate meds. I didn't want to stop people wearing it. This isn't a particularly bad allergy, but enough that I can't smell for the rest of the day, and my eyes swell. It becomes bad for me to stay at work. This supervisor was late to the shift, didn't help me open, and didn't tell me she was wearing the perfume ingredient. I was stressed and almost had an allergic reaction, but caught it in time. Told HR and my boss. HR was not happy. My boss covered for her. Happened again the next week. HR not happy. My boss covered again. I worked there for 12 months before my contract ended and I decided not to renew. Story 62. Employees are public servants and required to wear provided uniforms. Female employee gets written up for not wearing proper uniform. Female employee reports to HR that her supervisor is abuse her with his eyes while doing uniform checks of literally hundreds of employees as they leave for the day. We also get a many "I'm being harassed by my supervisor" complaints when it's just the supervisor doing their job of supervising. The sense of entitlement among public employees is astounding. Story 63. Not HR, but one of my direct reports went to my boss complaining I'd threatened his job. Boss says he doesn't want to deal with it. Tells the employee to call HR. Employee calls HR, or calls my boss, and tells him to deal with it. My boss writes me up. This all happened before my shift started. During my write-up talk, my boss said he was moving the complainer to the better shift because he now feared a hostile work environment, preventing me from ever leaving my shift. I had 8 years there as a supervisor. Complainer was there less than 2 years. Story 64. I am posting on behalf for my wife. She works in a call center type HR environment, so they typically take a lot of phone calls with payroll type questions. One day she gets a call from a guy asking to split payments, but the amount has to be consistent so that the same amount goes into one account and the rest go into the other. This was not possible because said employee was commission paid, IDKY. Cut to the guy saying he is trying to leave his girlfriend, and she can't know of a recent pay increase and that he is worried about getting murdered if his current girlfriend finds out he is making more money. What? My wife suggested he call the police. She has also told several stories about addicts who are very open about their dissatisfaction with not being paid because they need to buy substances. Story 65, not HR as it's just a pub. But recently I had a complaint made against me as I addressed the woman and her husband guys, as in I said, "Hey guys." She made a point to say everything was perfect except for my phrasing. Apparently it was very rude and I should never talk to a customer that way, especially a woman. I bit my tongue as they left, as to not say bye guys. Some people just like a petty complaint, story 66, not HR. However, to me, this was the worst offense I had ever witnessed. Background. We work in a body shop. It's dirty, dusty, smells like paint. Half the people here barely shower. One day, we are all rounded up and called for a meeting by the owner. The owner is standing there with a look of annoyance in his eye. Someone didn't flush the toilet, that is broken. The detailer didn't go to HR. He went to the owner and complained. So after a 30-minute meeting, we learned to flush, I guess? I don't know, either way. I talked to the owner later, and he told me to find a detailer. Still looking for one. The worst part? The detailer spends over an hour in the bathroom every day watching movies on his phone. God, I can't wait until someone competent walks through the door. Story 67. Had a guy who claimed his boss, female, was picking on him because of him being gay. When asked what she told him to do, it was his job responsibilities. Just usually they had an assistant that did that stuff for them. Story 68. I was reported to HR for not making enough sandwiches. I was on an 8-hour shift, alone, and the person who closed the day before had done nothing. I had to make all the salads, do the chickens, all the cleaning, plus stock, expiries, etc. There was no time, and not to mention I didn't get a single break because the manager wouldn't let us eat in the office, and I couldn't leave the department. I ultimately quit since the manager did this to me all the time and never went after the other staff. Story 69. This one happened to my wife. She had a coworker that she just didn't get along with at all, but was required for assorted reasons to keep working with. Their disagreements grew and grew until it eventually ended up in HR mediation, and my wife, the coworker, each one's immediate manager. The mediator recommended a number of steps and things that would, if not improve the relationship, at least reach a detente that would allow work to continue. At the end of the mediation meeting, the coworker asked, "What is the next step if this doesn't work?" Even the coworker's manager raised her eyebrows at this question. The coworker doesn't work there anymore. Story 70. I was an HR manager for a large machine shop. One of the welders was a lesbian female. Her and her partner wanted to have a child. So she was asking all her coworkers for sperm so she could get pregnant. She could not afford to purchase from a doctor, she said. All the guys were creeped out and asked that she stop. I had to write her up for solicitation in the workplace. I think one of the guys ended up giving her some. Story 71. I once had to mediate a conversation between two software engineers. One was convinced the other had installed an extra bright bulb in their desk lamp just to antagonize the other. The end result was me crawling around in a dark, dank storage closet to find a bulb that would allow all of us to get in with our lives. Story 72. I was the one who was complained about and subsequently fired from a temp job. I was on my way to work and the temp service called me and said I was being let go for being sneaky and writing things down. I had been there for 4 days and was in training. I just so happened to tend to lean over my notebooks when I write, and I was trying to write down everything they were telling me. But apparently, that was a big no-no, and it bothered them that they couldn't see what I was writing. For the record, they never asked me to either show it to them or stop writing like that. I was pretty mad. It was dumb. Story 73. Not an HR employee, but a coworker said he was pulled into the HR office with another manager. The manager brings up that the employee has been collecting a lot of OT over the past few weeks. The HR head asked the manager, and he said just a lot, with no evidence to back his claim. So the HR head looks at the employee's time cards, and over the last 2 weeks, he accumulated 80.23 hours, 23 minutes worth of OT. The employee and the HR head both shared the same face of disbelief that the manager complained about less than an hour of OT. Keep in mind, this employee works as a bartender, so he may be asked to help guests out before being able to clock out. Story 74. We had someone send in a complaint that other women shouldn't poop at work because both the poop and the spray stink. This led to all of our officers and managers having a 2-hour discussion on poop. Not our brightest moment. We also had someone a few weeks later put a dead cow in our giant garbage bin. I'm not sure if it was an employee or someone who lived nearby, but either way it caused lots of issues. Story 75. The classic story from our HR is they got a complaint from someone that their coworkers were not including them on their image sharing emails. They must have later realized that was just asking for questions and asked them to remove the complaint, leading to actual suspicion. Very quickly it came into light that several long-term employees were using work computers and work accounts to share specific adult film back and forth all day at work. The employee that made the initial complaint simply wanted to be included because they knew they were being left out of something. Story 76. Not HR, but I got to witness the saga of the boots recently as a part-time peon. Background is the company I work for has delivery drivers, and since they will be visiting construction sites, it provides work boots for them. In-store employees have to provide their own footwear within dress code. We had hired a female driver and ordered the smallest size of boots our supplier had available, and they did not fit her. One of our part-time drivers encouraged our in-store assistant manager to try the boots on for herself and see if they fit, which they did. The part-time driver then encouraged her to take them. So the assistant manager took the boots. The manager noticed this and told her that, well, he didn't really care about the boots, since they were just going to sit unused anyway, that she should not wear them to work because the employees under her did not have footwear provided by the company. Her defense was that one of the part-time drivers who told her it was okay, but the manager thought he had gotten through to her eventually. The next time he saw her wearing them at work, she explained that she had cute boots for at-home use and that these would be perfect for work use. He reiterated that it was unacceptable for her to be wearing them at work, so she emailed his boss looking for backup. The boss's boss almost immediately called her and explained to her that he could actually fire her for what she had done. He used a specific analogy to explain why it wasn't okay, and shared the analogy with the store manager at a regularly scheduled meeting they have the next week. The store manager then reiterated that specific analogy to the assistant manager the next time the topic of the boots came up. Yes, it was still a point of contention. She took this consistent messaging from 2 levels of management as a sign that she was being ganged up on, and tried to go over the district manager's head, going to both regional management and HR about it. This ended in an official write-up that she thought was just so unfair. Never mind her ignoring instructions from not just her boss, but her boss's boss, too. She has since left the company. Story 77. Where to start? Someone was eating an apple too loud. Someone was clicking their mouse typing too loud. 2 separate people. During the late winter/early spring, the door was propped open for 10 to 15 minutes while folks were taking things out to the company car. Someone had to call out the next day because they were too cold. A manager came to me because her staff could hear someone in my team laugh. Someone was convinced that we had poison ivy growing in the crack between the parking lot and the sidewalk, maybe 1 inch at the most, and that while walking into the building, she got a rash from the poison ivy and we should pay for her to take the next day off. There was no poison ivy. Story 78. At a former job, all of our team members got pulled in one by one about who was farting. Someone had complained to HR and my boss was like, "I can't believe I have to ask you this, but are you the one passing gas constantly?" It wasn't me. I never smelled anything. Story 79. Had a friend get fired for making awful comments. I asked him if he did. He informed me he certainly did not. He said they brought him in, told him numerous complaints had been filed over the past few weeks and they were going to have to let him go. Clearly, there was a conspiracy. I asked, "You believe that numerous people got together and decided to all go to HR separately over the course of multiple weeks because they just didn't like you?" Him, "Yeah." Me, "This is your 2nd job in 6 months. What did you get fired for last time?" Him, "I quit that one. They had it out for me since day 1. If multiple people at multiple jobs complain enough to lose you 2 jobs in 6 months, maybe you're just an asshole. Or if so many people over multiple jobs got together to form a conspiracy to keep you unemployed, it may be you did something that was really messed up, man." HR story time. What are the incidents that have stuck with you, both good and bad? Story 1. Something that lives rent-free in my brain. The time I had to explain to an employee that despite not having any PTO available, she needed to go home and change her pants after crapping herself. It was severe enough that her chair needed to be replaced. To add the good, worked closely with a subordinate. She was tired of the company's usual BS. She was a minority and she had a legit reason to be annoyed. Anyway, she decided she wanted to move across the country to be near her family. Only she dreaded interviewing. Since my role at the time focused heavily on interviewing candidates, she asked me to teach her to be a good interviewee. We worked on techniques and practiced interviewing for about a month. She applied to a role that would have been a big step up for her out near family and got the job. She genuinely thanked me for taking the time to coach her, attributing her success to my help. Honestly, I've never felt more appreciated by anyone in a professional setting, even now. 11 years later. Still makes me smile whenever I think of it. Story 2. Positive. I launched a program to hire deaf individuals to staff a retail store overnight when we were struggling to find people who wanted to work that shift. Employed around 15 individuals 10 years ago, a handful are still there, most in some sort of leadership. The worst? My boss was fired just before the holidays. Avoid this at all costs. It's awful. He told me to take the day off, even though the next day was the office holiday party. I didn't care for events and often didn't participate. Fun times of being HR. Anyhow, he showed up to that Christmas party and he murdered one of the founders of the law firm. Critically wounded another and then passed. Story 3. Good. We hired a veteran with PTSD to work in our warehouse. He was a mountain of a man, but very kind. Overall, he was someone that you'd remember just because of his stature, both physically and personality. Bad. Some idiot temporary employee in the warehouse decided he wanted to start crap with said gargantuan veteran with PTSD. Things escalated to where the idiot pulled a box cutter on the veteran. The veteran's PTSD kicked into overdrive, and he proceeded to beat this temporary employee into the ground like nothing I've ever seen before. It is an absolute bloody mess, and it takes multiple people to pull the veteran off the idiot, who, by the way, is now a pile of black and blue mincemeat. The warehouse is absolute insanity, with some people screaming with adrenaline. Veteran was able to be treated for minor injuries, mostly to his hands on site. Idiot gets carted off to the hospital. From the footage, it is clear who started the fight, and that it was self-defense. Unfortunately, the veteran's PTSD had him continue the beating long after the idiot stopped being able to defend himself. We ended up having to let him go, but not before we made sure he had some resources to get job placement help, a recommendation letter, and a small severance. Idiot didn't get jack crap from us, aside from a letter to his staffing agency outlining the whole event and our recommendation that he be dropped from their lineup. Story 4. Bad. I had an employee that had 30 years of service with the company murder. Someone who he got into a verbal argument with about politics. Luckily not at work. He led the police on a high-speed chase before getting caught. I was listening to the whole thing on the radio while driving to work. He was terminated for no call/no-show. Good. Assisting an employee and family who was diagnosed with a termination illness. I helped them fill out paperwork to get an early life insurance payout. I assisted with the leave paperwork. They were so gracious and appreciative of me just doing my job. Story 5. The most positive. A new hire completed his onboarding, but waived life insurance. He had an aneurysm and was about to pass away. I was allowed to retroactively enroll him in life insurance so his family would have coverage. He passed away a few days later. Story 6. Good. I love traveling for work. I worked in talent acquisition, and anytime we were doing new trainings, implementing a new system, or even updating new policies, my boss would let me fly out to the different location. I would either fly out earlier or stay later and get to enjoy the city, on my dime, of course. Bad. As an HR BP, I remember having to fire this big director for harassment. This was not my first or last harassment case, but I will never forget it because his wife also worked with us and was out on maternity leave at the same time. He had forcibly kissed a coworker and stuck his hand up her shirt at an after-hours event. He sat in the office crying, blaming his behavior on the fact his wife just had a baby and it had been a long time for him. I happened to also be prego, and the amount of rage I felt for his wife. I always think about that to this day. Story 7. Bad. My boss was having dental work done and had a temporary tooth cap thing. One day, as she was talking to me, the tooth cap slipped and somehow flew across the aisle and under the cubicle wall. Not so bad, right? Yeah, she got on her hands and knees and dug under that cubicle wall until she found it. She stood up, brushed it off, and stuck it right back in her mouth. Good open enrollment season. I have to travel 50 or so miles to another location to do the open enrollment presentation and paperwork. Back in the day, nothing was online. Only problem? Our benefits provider hadn't gotten the packets to us yet. So off I went to the local Kinko's version I printed from our version edits. I was there for hours making enough copies for the presentations our department had the next day. I was exempt, so there was no extra OT for me, but I did buy a phone charger because my phone died. End result, we were able to do our open enrollment presentations without a hitch. I even got Employee of the Quarter for that. And shockingly, Employee of the Year, though I did have to share the year award with someone in operations. Understandably. Story 8. Good. 3 years into my career and 1 month into working for him, the CEO/owner asked how busy I was, and without waiting for an answer said, "I need you to go Helsinki Wednesday to help set up our new business." Being trusted to just get stuff done was great and helped shape the kind of employers I'd seek out. Bad, amusing now, but having to tell my wife I'd be organizing personal security and we'd need to install a Ring doorbell wasn't great. Story 9. Good. A former employee that I hadn't talked to in close to 10 years tracked me down to tell me that his career was going great, and he attributed a lot of that to my coaching. This was a high-potential young man who kept getting in his own way because he thought he was the smartest guy in the room. One day I sat him down and said, "You can be right or you can be successful, but you won't be both. Shut up and listen to the people above you with decades of really good experience and knowledge. Learn from them now. Worry about being right when you've got a decade under your belt." It was awesome to see how well he was doing, and humbling that he attributed a lot of it to me. 2. Bad, I've given that advice to plenty of others who preferred to be right. Bad at the termination meeting where an employee said, "If you fire me, I'm going to end my life. This job is all I have." That was not a fun day. We called 911 and he was placed on a psychiatric hold. He filed for unemployment a few weeks later, so I know he didn't take his life at that point. I often wonder how he's doing. Story 10. Negative/odd. A generically attractive and married male director of housekeeping having to resign on the spot because he had been sleeping with one of his employees, a J1/international employee, on resort property and guest room. An investigation had started and it was obvious where it was headed. Resigned before he could get fired. If I had a nickel for every time that happened, I'd have 2 nickels. Isn't a lot, but weird it happened twice at the same resort. Story 11. Bad. Super early in my career as an HR coordinator, maybe a month into my new role, my director and I started hearing strange complaints about one of our supervisors. Intimidation, bullying, that sort of thing. As the investigation unfurled, what we learned was that the crew was rightfully terrified of this individual, and that they'd done some absolutely terrible things that people hadn't reported out of fear, like cutting worker lunchboxes in half with a chainsaw, or bringing stray caged animals to work to literally drown in front of workers. The guy had apparently been with the organization for years, and these things had been ongoing. We were lucky the guy walked away willingly when it all started coming out, but this one still gives me chills to this day. Good? The stories where you get a chance to help people. I'm in wellness, learning, engagement, and safety these days. And my best moments have been those times where I've helped staff and seen them succeed in whatever their goals happen to be. Sometimes that's helping them find the right wellness support. Sometimes that's helping my fabulous team members with ad hoc. Sometimes that's supporting a professional development opportunity. And honestly, just all the little moments of gratitude and thanks from staff and leadership. Very grateful for my current role, as we often have experiences and perceptions in HR that are inherently negative. My most positive moments are just those small expressions of appreciation and knowing that the impact I've made on our teams has been a good one. My best moments are honestly helping new grads and students and seeing them hired after their placement. It's amazing to see them succeed. Story 12. I'll go with amusing one. The time I had to help close down an entire company and lay off a regional office of about 100 people. As soon as we made the announcement, they all pulled liquor and substances out of their bags and started going crazy. It was 8 a.m. They stole the art off the walls and all the potted plants, but not the phones or computers. They started a chant of "damn company name" over and over again, recorded it, and put it on YouTube. Sadly, the video is gone now. They used whiteboard markers to write all over the place. The building called the cops on us twice, trying to get them out of there. Nobody was in danger. Nothing actually bad happened. It was like when elementary school kids find out they're going to Chuck E. Cheese instead of school, but with substances and liquor. The time we fired a manager for equals harassment, really assault, and he spent 15 minutes begging us to help him come up with a story of what to tell his wife. Not in a pleading, what do I do kind of way. He legitimately wanted us to help with his cover story and kept trying to run hypotheticals. Sir, we just fired you for this. We do not like you or care what your wife thinks of you. If I could, I'd send her the security footage myself. Implementing an on-site rotational program for leadership who had never worked in the field. Inspired by Undercover Boss. Basically, ownership wanted everyone to spend a week doing field work to better understand the business. Nice idea, terrible execution. The worst leaders really bungled stuff and got exposed. It was a series of what could a banana cost, $10 level failing. We caught a new hire watching adult film and pleasure himself in the conference room. Older guy, but not old enough to think something was wrong with him mentally. When we sat him down, he basically went, "Well, you got me," and left. No argument, no denial. A clear appreciation that he wasn't supposed to do that and was getting fired, but absolutely unbothered. Had an assistant in another department resign, and her boss loved her and wanted to retain her. I sat down to find out why she was leaving and try to make a counteroffer or something. She was chasing her dream to become a novelist. Obviously not something we can offer. I sat with the manager and watched him try to puzzle out ways we could somehow offer that to her while still working full-time. It was like watching a fish try to climb a tree. I'll never forget his face as the cogs were turning in his mind. He was sure there was something we could do. Story 13. Good. Retail HR. There was a slightly older woman who had recently immigrated to the US that applied to work overnight/unload. We decided to extend a job offer to her. I prepped her paperwork and walked into the office to go over everything. Sat down, and as soon as I said congratulations, she sprang up out of the chair and started jumping up and down with excitement. She told me that she had moved to help her single-parent daughter in the US, and that she was going to be sending most of her money back home to her country of origin to help her family there. Gave me a new appreciation for family and the value of a dollar. Bad. Also retail HR. 16-year-old cashier collectively took part in more than $2,500 worth of shortage in a single shift. Same person coming through their line multiple times and keying the transaction as cash, but going through the motions like they were paying with a card. They were led out of the store in handcuffs. Story 14. I had to tell a recently, like the day before, widow that our company offered insurance had a death clause. All that extra insurance she paid for was wasted. They had just adopted twin special needs babies. This was Christmas Eve. Story 15. Good. I advocated hard to hire a candidate that had no Canadian work experience, but had some really interesting experience working for the Mexican government. His English needed a bit of work, but I was so confident he was the right guy. And I was right. He was an absolutely amazing employee, and I got tons of praise for fighting for him. Best part? When I left, he sat me down to personally thank me. He told me many of the people from his local English classes had similar qualifications to him and were working on night cleaning crews. He felt that could have been him too, if I hadn't fought so hard to secure him his current professional role. Bad had a year-long saga with an on-leave employee that was clearly having some severe untreated mental health issues. He made all of my employees cry before I had to take him on, after which he would call the office and leave incoherent voicemails in the middle of the night and email me bizarre phone screenshots with no context. This even continued while I was on maternity leave. I eventually found out that he had created a website about me on which he posted several police and cybersecurity reports naming me as his suspect because he believed I had hacked all of his devices. Obviously, no law enforcement ever did anything, but was still very threatening and upsetting. Story 16. Negative. We had a sweet employee. She was just a good worker, kept her head down, did her work, polite, never heard any complaint about her. She had small children and a husband, and they were a lovely young family. Her husband was newly in law enforcement for only a few months. He died very suddenly and brutally in the line of duty. We were all shocked and devastated for her. We obviously provided her time off to process such a sudden loss. After a few weeks, she emailed an extremely poised, gracious, professional resignation letter speaking positively of her time with the org, above and beyond anything she needed to do. I honestly would not have blamed her if we never heard from her again, or just emailed us one sentence saying she couldn't return. I always remember her when other employees are blatantly unprofessional or no call/no show. If she can somehow find a way to maintain grace and professionalism in such a terrible circumstance, I have absolutely zero patience for people who are just immature and inconsiderate. Story 17. Bad. When I first started my career in HR, I was so excited to present a verbal offer that I called the wrong candidate. I got her verbal acceptance and then sent the offer letter. And it wasn't until I got a call from the selected candidate that I realized my mistake. They were both named Courtney, so now that name haunts me. Story 18. I was the HR sergeant for a military police unit of about 100 people, and I also worked in the headquarters S1 department, helping about 1,000 people all over the base. Good. I spent a week updating ERBs with each person in the company, and several of them were able to land difficult promotion. One basically landed his E7 cause of me. His ERB was a disaster. Bad. I got a call while I was out on leave that they needed me back because the supply sergeant had just hurt her son. He passed away. A paralegal. And I had to do most of the grunt work of processing his transfer out of active duty and into the custody of the military prison system. Story 19. Bad, a high-performing manager who had been employed for nearly 2 decades, was arrested for hundreds of counts of SA against a minor. State policy came to our facility, and the employee was pulled from a meeting, put in cuffs outside the door. Worst part was their spouse and stepchild also worked for us, and we had to inform them of what happened. They were completely blindsided. Based on the details that came out later, I truly believe they had no idea. Good. I noticed an employee's personality changed and showed other concerning signs. I scheduled a check-in, and turns out they were a victim of domestic violence with a new partner. Was able to get the EE support using company EAP and other resources to get them out of that situation. They ultimately left the company to relocate, but they appreciated my concern and said without it, their situation may have ended differently. Story 20. Good. One of our employees had a daughter with serious and painful chronic health condition that was also impacting her mental health. She was admitted to an adolescent inpatient mental health facility due to repeated death behavior. The health insurance company refused to cover the claims, which totaled over $100,000. The employees shared that they'd have to take out a second mortgage because terminating her care was not an option, and she'd likely end her life if they did. After fighting the insurance company over this issue for weeks, I went direct to our company leadership and was able to get them to override the insurance company and pay the claim. We were self-insured. It was such a good feeling to deliver that news to her. She broke down in tears and called her husband right on the spot to share the news. We've both moved on from that company, but she will check in occasionally to share updates on how well her daughter is doing. She recently graduated high school and is doing amazing. I have some bad stories, but none involve death like the rest of y'all, so I'll hold on to them. Story 21. bad/weird/shouldn't be funny, but kind of is. An employee was sleeping with multiple partners, having them urinate on her, and recording it, which is her own business, I suppose, but she thought it made sense to casually show groups of her coworkers at work, as casually as you would show someone a cute picture of your dog. When asked about it, she said, "I just take this stuff really seriously." What that means exactly, I hope to never know. Good. A tight-knit team had some drama when one person found out the others had a group text chat that excluded only her. She was devastated and angry. They were suddenly shutting her out. She was requesting a transfer because she thought she did something wrong. Turns out, it was just a group chat specifically made to plan a surprise party for her on her birthday. She stayed where she was at and had a wonderful, not-so-surprising party a few days later. Story 22. We had an intern with a very clear disability that was not disclosed to anyone, nepotism. I had to explain to him that using his long black hair as floss, napping under the desk, and burping loud enough for everyone to hear, and lack of personal hygiene, the entire office reek, are not appropriate in an office setting. Story 23. I always tried to encourage employees to stay when they were thinking of leaving. No one did the same for me. I tried to get minimum wage employees' wages to increase. I couldn't. I tried to get more benefits. I couldn't. Small company. Thankfully, nothing major. But it's just a sad situation. Story 24. An aide where I worked reported witnessing an RN divert narcotics. We brought the nurse in and you could tell during that meeting he was high. The nurse manager ripped this nurse apart, trying to get him to confess. I finally stopped the meeting because it was obvious that the nurse was traumatized and we were getting nowhere. Come the next morning, I find out that the nurse blew his brains out a few hours after the meeting. But that wasn't the worst of it. Several weeks later, the nurse manager let it slip that she had been suspecting that he was diverting narcotics, but didn't look closely into it because we were already short-staffed. I really checked out of caring anything about that facility, and a few months later was offered a severance agreement and gladly accepted. The best not one single event, but I never lost a union arbitration because I always had my crap together. I made sure that management followed the CBAs, regulations, and policies. That was a real struggle that I got a lot of hate from both sides, but worth it. Story 25. We had an employee parked in our bus yard while he was out en route. A maintenance vehicle hit his car while it was parked. They paid for his car to be repaired and paid reasonable rental. The guy had a drivable car and chose to get a rental car while he waited for his repairs to start. We didn't owe for that. He goes to one of the board meetings and goes off about it, and then gestures to our blind board member and talks about how disrespectful she is because her eyes are closed while he's speaking. He ended up having attendance issues and left the company before he was fired. He's trying to be rehired and they're rejecting it, and he can't understand why. Positive. My boss and I have talked at length about how we wish people would market themselves better for jobs. We see people that we think would be great get passed over because they don't tweak their resume for the job they want. He was approached by an employee who wanted tips on how to land a supervisory role, so my boss sent him to me. We sat down for a couple of hours and worked out a really nice resume for him, and we talked about the application questions and how he could approach some of his answers. He's being considered, and I'm rooting for him. It was really rewarding to do that. Story 26, the worst. An employee who worked from home called me out of the blue one day to basically self-report himself for almost acting inappropriately with an intoxicated woman he encountered in his building. She was completely random / had no affiliation with our company or anything to do with it. While on the phone with this employee, after I determined no crime had been committed, as far as I could reasonably see, I asked him why exactly he had wanted to call HR up and tell me about something that happened at the communal jacuzzi in his building. He wasn't working at the time, and it had literally nothing to do with work. His response was that, since he worked from home, technically it happened on company property and he didn't know if HR should be informed. He obviously felt guilty about the situation, rightly so, ducking, and I think was looking for me to assuage him. It was okay, since nothing actually happened. Nope. Think again, bud. Story 27. The man who had a fistula following a botched hernia repair. He never worked again, and I never forgot his struggles and desperate need for an advocate. My leave specialists are trained differently now. Story 28. Negative that turned into a positive. I managed a really great HR administrator. The company where I worked was horrible for growth. I tried for a year to get her a promotion and decent raise, but they just wouldn't do it. No matter how much documentation and business case I built, they also didn't want her to work overtime, even during payroll, where she was the only person doing it using a very manual system. She was frustrated and started working and not logging her time. I was not happy about that when I found out. I encouraged her to update her resume and find another job. She felt she was being disloyal, but I pushed her to do it. She got a much better position and has grown by leaps and bounds. I am very proud of her. Negatives. I cannot tell you how many people I've had to interrupt while they pleasure or had sex in the bathroom, or other room in the office. I don't understand why this is a thing. There was one company I worked for a long time ago where this was a regular occurrence. We had to catch them in the act, so I had to stand in the bathroom or outside the office door, knock or wait for them to finish and bring them in for a meeting. I cannot unhear what I have heard. Story 29. We switch office spaces and went from individual trash cans to having trash cans in common areas like break room and near printers. Someone careened that it affects their work, and they don't want to worry about getting up and down just to throw things away, and it causes them stress. She wanted to have her own trash can and buy it herself and was willing to get fired or written up over it. It's memorable because it's just one of those most petty. I hear complaints and people caring all day about this and that, but the weird ones stand out. The office trash can was about 8 feet from her desk. By the way, story 30, when COVID started, my office changed the trash situation to be similar to this. They didn't want the janitorial staff to have to go into each individual office due to infection concerns and the amount of time that takes. Crap. I've never seen people throw such hissy fits over having to throw their trash into the bigger trash cans in common areas. They still had their little trash bins. They just needed to walk the 30 steps to a large one to dump the little ones at the end of the day. Grown adults lost their minds over this. Story 31. An employee came to me to complain that his optometrist dropped him because he canceled several appointments and was asking for free trial contacts for months. Another time I had an employee suggest that we provide cots for napping on their lunchtime. Yeah, let me get right on that one. Story 32. I used to be part of HR team in a very big company. We have 4 plants. The manager of one of the plants was always very difficult, and we had plenty complaints about him. Mean, made people quit. Harsh, raising his voice, throwing tantrums when targets were not met. He is in his mid-40s, always clean-cut, always in a shirt and tie. He is respected and feared. I must admit he is a highly intelligent man who can work under huge pressure and take decisions quickly. Rational type. In January, one female employee who is known to be very, very good at her job filed a complaint about him too. She came to us crying, basically the same as anyone else. He raised his voice at her, implied she is not smart, incompetent, and she came to us crying. I respected her a lot because she was 30, so not entry level, but still way younger than him and way below him in the company. He was the highest level in the plant. She was almost bottom. We all respected her even though we couldn't say anything and stay impartial. She stood up to him, demanded respect from him, and in my 5 years of working there, I never saw anyone standing up to him, male or female, manager or no manager. But she did. Politely, but she did. People were talking about her courage, and he was called out by the headquarters for his behavior. She was an employee that could be trusted. She was reliable, had great feedback from her bosses, colleagues, customers, smart, beautiful, mannered, plenty hobbies. She was special indeed. And in June, we held an evening party. To celebrate a milestone of our company, she slept with him. The thing is, he was never known as this kind of manager. He is workaholic, focused, irritated, and always dissatisfied. He loves saying he is not satisfied. His wife also works here. We received 3 anonymous, different sources, complaints about what happened between them, and for sure there are true. There is solid evidence. I didn't do anything about it. We were told to just forget it. We never dealt with these kind of situations, and my boss said to consider it office drama. And that's it. I cannot tell this to anyone, so I will just leave it here for strangers. I must admit, I am a bit disappointed. I thought that young woman was better than this, and I wonder how did they end doing it? They don't even know each other. He yelled at her that one time during an online meeting/call. He barely interacts with her department. In one of the leaked texts, she told another coworker that since he treated her that badly, she wanted to impress him and prove him she just had a bad day and is worthy and smart in story 33. A remote employee that was upset that he couldn't attend work social events because he was remote. We told him that all employees are welcome to social events, not just in-office employees. The employee said that they lived too far from the nearest office to attend a social event, so we should mail him a bottle of booze every time we have a social event because it was unfair that he couldn't take advantage of the free alcohol. The other complaint was after COVID, send everybody home to work. We had free food in the office. The employee said that we should send her groceries since she no longer got free snacks. This was a well-compensated employee, not someone who needed the free food to survive. Last complaint. When the office and many restaurants closed during COVID, an employee demanded that we pay for food delivery every day because he has never made a meal on his own and didn't know how to cook. Story 34. Not about a coworker, but someone once complained that she might have to sue us because we didn't have Band-Aids in office. She had gotten a paper cut and said it would be all our fault if she got an infection. Story 35. I think the worst one and hardest one to deal with was a girl that smells. It wasn't just a light body odor. She smelled like a wet dog. I guess she has a lot of dogs in her home, but it would leave a trail of smell wherever she walked and was strong enough to smell her across a table. It took me about 2 weeks before I was able to handle it. Definitely. Doesn't help that I'm a female, and she already thought I picked on her because I had to discuss her clothing choices with her. We worked in a restaurant, and she was a bartender. She showed up in basketball shorts once and would wear tattered, ripped clothes as her aesthetic. No problem with her clothes out of work, but they were not appropriate for our job. Story 36. I was sitting in the HR office with one of the members of HR. I was waiting on her to finish a form so that we could go eat lunch. Suddenly, this guy comes in. He was a young temp employee and had only been there a week or so, and says he has something he needs to talk about. I start to get up to leave when he blurts out that he doesn't like that fact that there are so many gays and lesbians working in the company. Once he says that, I sit right back down. The HR employee asks him to clarify, and he goes on about how his trainer was gay, and his team lead is gay, and his manager is a lesbian, all true, and he doesn't feel comfortable working around all these gays and lesbians. The HR employee asks him, is anyone has ever harassed him, which he says they haven't. She then says, so you want me to fire these employees strictly based on their sexual orientation, just so you don't feel uncomfortable? He says yes, after which she tells him to leave the office. She then calls in his manager and talks with her about it. He ends up quitting by the end of the week. Story 37. Came into work early for a morning shift, work in an industrial lab. Heard noises from the back corner of the office portion of the building, but can't make out what they are because of distortion. Head that way to see what was going on, as I was the only one there, so I thought, at 3 a.m. See my lab manager ducking the district manager, her boss, while the HR rep for the district is sitting there, enjoying the view. I noped and went to the lab and tried to forget what happened. Story 38. I had a friend working at GM when HR thought it was a good idea to test everyone on the skill set needed for their department, regardless of how long they were in their position. Long careers, 15, 20, 25 years, were ruined because even though they worked there for a long time with a long string of great performance reviews, they didn't pass the test that measured what HR thought was required for the department. Say you're a materials expert working in a design department. You may know barely enough in the CAD system to draw a cylinder. On the other hand, given a cylinder, you can whip out all the properties that cylinder would have if it were made from aluminum, cold rolled steel, fiberglass, etc. You'd be out of your job because HR said you had to have a certain level of CAD expertise, even if it wasn't relevant to your role in the design process. Story 39. I used to work for a company that is an HR nightmare. Several events occurred. I was hired as a director of quality/regulatory, so I come in and start sprucing up documents, policy, and all the essential stuff. A VP of sales doesn't take to kindly to fixing the stuff they were lying, fraud, about, and tells me in front of HR, I'm going to make you so miserable that you quit this job. Still works there. Another sales guy went into a coma, health issue, and the higher-ups decided that they could fire him to keep their insurance cheaper and not pay out his life insurance. Luckily, HR pointed out the potential lawsuit. After they debated the cost of the lawsuit and whether they could win, they kept him on until he passed a week later. When I left, I had my own company. They decided they owned any IP I created when I was employed there. I had no contract and non-competes aren't legal in my state. The C-level employees all were convicted of corruption in multiple countries and are in jail. Story 40. There was a dude in our other facility that was going around and wiping their ass and shoving the crap back up into the toilet paper dispenser so that when the next person goes to reach. Story 41. Oh, so many. The company I work for is a bit of a train wreck. Our GM walked up to an employee who was sitting at his desk in plain view of everyone to find that he was pleasure himself through his pocket. We had a woman loan a company vehicle to her teenage delinquent son illegally and didn't find out until we filed a stolen vehicle report almost a month later. And when she was fired for it, she tried to claim that we wouldn't have let her go if she wasn't black. I personally slept with my boss for about 6 months before being moved to a different location. We both got reprimanded. We had an employee receive BJ from a client in our parking lot and later had her husband come into our store, causing scene and threatening to sue us. One of our head sales managers used to try and sleep with every female employee. He hit on me several times, but I always ignored advances. He would regularly close early and screw women in his office after hours before going home to his wife. Story 42. I am the sysadmin for my company's location, and a bit ago the head of HR came up to me with some question. Apparently someone had reported that an employee was seen surfing CP on his work computer at his desk. What the heck, not cool, but then I had to ask her if she was sure they said it was on his work computer. She said yes, it was. I informed her that the corporate firewall would have blocked it as well as logged it, since, this film, corporate network, etc. Turned out to be that the man in question is an eccentric, friendly man. The woman who reported this is the judgmental person in the company, and I am actually furious that she was not fired for filing a false report. Story 43. I worked for a small, family-owned business. It was small when taking into consideration number of employees, less than 150, but large in the bucks it made, millions and millions a year. The HR department was one woman. Oh, the things she did. Sleeping with another employee and then forcing him to quit when she got tired of him. Calling people into her office to berate them until they cried, at which point she'd completely deny saying any of the ridiculously mean things she did. Someone eventually got a recording. Acting as though she ruled the kingdom. And if you weren't her minion, she could banish you. She uses people like no one's business, lying about another employee who intimidated her, going so far as to forge a note from an anonymous employee about how the first employee was sleeping with truck drivers in the warehouse and videotaping it. Quite a few things about the note were off and it was dismissed, but not before it ruined the falsely accused employee's marriage. Getting the family that owns the company to pay for her house above and beyond her regular salary, and so much more. She still works at this company and probably always will. She is one of the worst people I know. Story 44. I was diagnosed with IBS back when I started at a bank. My undergrad is in finance, and it severely limited my workday when I was having flare-ups. I had only been there about a year, and my manager was making my life a living hell. Texting me, saying I was faking it, even though I had so much documentation it was coming out of my ears, and harassing me basically even after I told him to stop. I brought my work cell phone in, my documentation, and went to HR. They got me on track with disability, back paid me for my time off from being sick. My manager had been clocking me out early, apparently, and investigated my manager, and I went back in the hospital and came back the next week, and my manager's desk was cleared. They pulled me and thanked me for reporting. They had fired him the day I went into the hospital, apparently. I stayed at that company for about 3 to 4 years before moving on to actually work in HR. I'm an HR director now, and I still to this day remember that, and it guides me during my work now. Yes, the job of HR is all about rules and legal issues, but it's also about doing the right thing. You just have to find a company to work for that also believes in doing the right thing. Not all HR is the same, and not all companies are good. Story 45. Our HR department is your standard company first, employees last HR department. One time, the former CIO called me a Karen, which specifically violates our handbook rule about hostile work environment. I reported him, and HR told me to work it out directly with him, and just sent me off. Didn't go on his record at all. Cut to last month, and the new CIO blew up at me on the phone because I pointed out his actions violated our handbook's process for reporting issues. Lost his mind, and yelled forever. I reported him to his boss, and was told there had been 2 other incidents reported and HR was looking into it. Went to HR and told her I wanted her to speak to him, and she agreed to do so. Followed up the day of the meeting via email to confirm, and got no reply. Followed up a second time a week and a half later, and got no reply. Followed up a third time after 12 business days and CC'd my boss. And finally she replied saying the situation was under active review, and she could not provide details but would reach out to schedule a mediated conversation if appropriate. A month later, here I am with no action taken. The CIO even forced a hug on an autistic employee having a panic attack due to him yelling, and nothing. 2 people on his team quit because nothing was done in their cases. Absolutely worthless. Story 46. After my first couple weeks, got called into HR to give a statement about the state of the department ID just joined. Apparently the manager only got the job because she was the only one that applied. She wasn't doing well. And then the 3rd week I was there, the other ladies in my department went up together to talk to HR about her again. I left after a couple more weeks, and after the manager decided to drunkenly text all of us nonsense and me separately about how she wants to be a good manager and how they are going to put her into training classes. After the burnt out of my last job, and then getting this crap show, I've been off work for over a month trying to find a remote job. The HR director just got hired there, so I think they were just grasping at straws. Story 47. A friend recommended I join his team, so I applied and got the job on promotion. Then he tells me he's leaving because it's awful. The hire boss was an ogre with insane standards, and there was a toxic atmosphere on the team. The person who interviewed and then onboarded me also left, as it was awful. The hire boss was bullying her to the point she couldn't hack it any longer. My own new boss has started the same day as me and knew nothing. Ironically, they gave him more training than me, even though I needed to know that stuff. So he was useless. All he could do was pass on messages from the toxic people about how rubbish I was. No one even explained my role to me, never mind any actual training. Things improved after a few years. Most toxic people left, but what a crap show. Story 48, I started a new job a few years ago. As it was quite a secure location, there were a lot of checks and forms to fill out. I got emailed a form with another person's details on. I presume their completed form had been saved as the blank template. Name, DOB, address, bank details, etc. I did not report it. I emailed them back saying what had happened. I didn't expect a response, as HR don't read emails. They only want you to respond to their email. Same thing happened again. I emailed again and no response again. I reported it, no explanation, no apology. When I left, I asked for all my forms to be given back to me. They ignored me. I despise HR with a passion. People paid extraordinary amounts to do basic paperwork. Story 49. A friend and I were chatting about something utterly innocuous, her toddler's nickname, which was overheard by someone fairly senior in HR in the building. 2 hours later, she received an email which was 6 pages of badly written smut involving her and misusing her son's nickname in a dirty manner. She read it and threw up. She didn't want to report it, but I insisted. She didn't know, but I'd previously put a report in about him making dirty, inappropriate remarks, but nothing on this scale. She put in a grievance. His boss and drinking friend gave him a verbal warning for wasting time at work. There was no mention of the sexual harassment. She gave up at that point. Story 50. My job had an anonymous employee review where employees got to share their opinions on management and HR. This was an assembly plant that treated employees like middle school kids, and management was dumber than a bag of rocks. At the end of the quarter, they decided they wanted to bring everyone to the break room to go over some of people's answers. This woman would read a very valid complaint or suggestion that would be clear as day and follow it up with, "I'm not sure what this means, so I'm gonna skip it." She did that with 90% of the reviews. Story 51. There was a woman temping to get a job where I was doing a contract role. They pay was crap, and my role was very junior and boring, so I was between jobs applying and taking a break from looking. I was there longer than her and she covered my breaks. She was always fake smiles and would interrupt people randomly to say she liked their top, etc., which would make people happy and be taken off guard. She would be friendly, but also had major self-esteem issues because she was obese based on stuff she'd say. She was nosy too. One day, I mistakenly told her about something that happened at the gym with a male acquaintance whom I didn't like romantically, and she said, "What are you waiting for? Your eggs are getting stale." And I was very shocked and upset. Who says that to someone, whether on the job or as friends? I was older than her, but I never complained about my life, unlike her who said she had to marry someone from back home. I complained to our boss, who said she'd talk to HR, and for me to talk to HR. HR was so rude and spun it around to me being the employee contract and the obese coworker, not temp, and that we were friends who had a fallout. But that's not true, as we never hung out. And that woman always forced me to make stupid chit-chat with her boring life. Eventually, I found a decent job and I left. Last heard, the obese coworker got hired into the permanent role. There was also harassment at this job, with a married male manager with a small child in another department. He tried crap with me, and I started acting rude back to him, and he acted like what was my issue. I told my boss, who also said he's like that and that he did stuff like that with her. So this horrible large company condones crap behavior. What is the worst HR is not your friend story you've witnessed or experienced? Story 1. My company's HR called all the engineers from my department back to main office for an annual review. HR asked us if there was any grievances or complaints that we wanted to sound out so that they can make our work more smooth and us more satisfied. They promised that whatever happens in here stays here. That gave my colleague the confidence to sound out all the toxic leadership that our managers put us through. He sounded out about the unnecessary paperwork system that my managers implemented, the unfairness of the work scope of admin and engineers. We engineers are expected to pick up the slack for admin when they drop the ball, but when engineers fall short in paperwork, we are to blame. The uncomfortable situation of our site office. Aircon was not working since 3 to 4 months ago, etc. The next day back in site office, my colleague found dead ends in everything he did. My manager sarcastically announced, "Since my colleague's name is not satisfied with the management style, I think I need pick up the slack." And then he proceeded to nitpick every single minor mistake in his paperwork. And he did it one by one, so my colleague had to go to the manager's office and back to his seat multiple times. After the manager is done, he would say that he thinks his own standard dropped, and he doesn't know if it is acceptable. So he told my colleague to double check with the second manager. The admin dept also chimed in sarcastically and said, "Since the admins are miserable people who abuse the engineers, then I guess the engineers are the perfect humans. I better not see a single mistake in their paperwork." After 2 weeks of psychological bullying, my colleague handed in his resignation notice. Story 2. If HR is involved, HR is not your friend, and you shouldn't treat them as a friend. Had a staff, he was the worst of the worst. Playing games while supposed to be working, coming to office 2 hours late, I'm pretty impressed. Not even being able to give proper answers. Everyone hated him and didn't want to work with him, which made him even happier, as he didn't need to work. Got HR involved, explained the situation. They didn't care. They just cared that proper procedure was followed, meaning 2 warning letter and PIP. Guess what? That guy actually shaped up on PIP. But after that, slacked again. Went to HR. HR said the same thing. So we have a person who is gaming the system and unfireable. Story 3. Coming from someone in the HR profession. HR start taking sides in upper management politics, middle management HR, giving textbook answers on good employment practices or employment management without practicing or applying any of them to employee within their own department. Also, two-faced personalities. Nice and polite when employees are still under employment, but as soon as an employee is serving notice or resigning, their true colors start to show. Start bad-mouthing the employee. Story 4. I kind of screwed our HR over. After we could all go back to work in offices, HR sent a memo to all staff reminding us to dress professionally. Some people also got written up for flouting the dress code. I happened to have a meeting at head office one afternoon, so I brought some cakes along for everyone. One of the departments I popped by to say hi was HR, and I discovered they were all dressed pretty casually. Jeans, t-shirts, one guy was in berms, Trax escorts, etc. I didn't point out their attire, but suggested we do a Wi-Fi after exchanging niceties and offering cake. The next week, I told some of my team that I'll be going to work in jeans, and they followed suit. By Thursday, we had an email to all back office departments specifically pointing out that our team was not dressed professionally and reminding us that appropriate attire for work should be the norm. I simply replied the email to all with the wife I took with our casually dressed HR. My boss followed up with HR on the punishment we were supposed to be dealt and never got a reply. Story 5 did an exit interview, HR trying to sound me out what happened with me and my boss. Yes, I quit because of him. But as usual, I remained cordial and said, everything is fine between us. After the exit interview in the morning, it seems like my boss knows every word of our conversation in the afternoon. Actually wanted to spill the deeds, but luckily hold myself back. HR is not and will never be your friend. Story 6. All-female HR team purposely held back on renewing someone's contract after they found out through rumors that she was pregnant, and then terminated her shortly when it became impossible for abortion. Whatever happened to girls, protect girls. HR people are the craptiest. Story 7. HR getting employee to confess in false hope of leniency, record confession, grounds for immediate termination. Initially is just going to fire them with notice, but HR went the extra mile to make sure it's immediate termination. Story 8. Tendered resignation late Friday afternoon due to toxic overseas manager with track record of verbal abuse. Manager asked to speak an hour after letter sent, so asked HR to sit in on call. HR lady, I need to knock off early to pick up my kids, so we'll leave you to have a good chat. End up being threatened and bombarded with sarcastic remarks by manager when I refused to say where I was going next. Duck you, HR. Story 9. My ex-company has a 360-degree appraisal for management level, so US lowly staff can appraise our bosses as well. HR swore up and down it was anonymous, so some of us were honest and commented on the blatant favoritism that our department head had towards some people, and how it resulted in a chain reaction of everyone else having to pick up the slack and do unnecessary work. Fast forward a month later, the department head was snippily focusing her ire on the very same staff who wrote the negative feedback on her favoritism and started picking on them until they resigned. So much for anonymity. HR stood by management the whole time and tried to gaslight those who resigned that it's not only management who is at fault. Another company's HR dangled entitlements and performance bonuses to entice candidates to accept the job. Later on, all the fine print came out that while WFH days are entitlements, your team lead can override them on their whims and use them to mark you down during performance appraisal. Story 10. Joined this digital marketing agency once. I learned that fresh grad hires were told by HR that they would be bonded for 2 years because the company sent them for certification and external training, basic Facebook Studio, Google certifications that they needed to do their jobs in the first place. If they wanted to leave before the expiry of this bond, they'd have to pay back 1 month of their salary. It was such a crafty company that I heard of fresh grads willingly doing this just so they can get out of the company. I think I pretty much said out aloud to everyone in earshot, it was an open concept office, that such a practice is illegal under the Employment Act, and that everyone should definitely read the Employment Act. The company in general was a crap show of unethical practices and exploitation. The boss hired fresh grads from Spain, as at the time there was severe graduate unemployment there, and he only hired pretty Spanish girls who were unqualified, but whose sole purpose was to turn up at meetings to make the company look more professional. He got them EPs even though they were clearly paid a salary below the qualifying threshold. So I left before my probation was up, but I made it a point of telling all the fresh grads there that HR can't do jack crap and they'd be thrown out of court if they tried to enforce their bullcrap bond. BTWHR then paid me to end my probation a week early. Story 11. Uncle here. I was job hunting for a while. This HR from an IT company near Matter MRT station Called to ask if I could come for an interview. They need to see the originals of my certificates. This stuff is at my mom's. Took a return trip and some time to put together. Anyway, 10 minutes into the interview, they said I was too senior for the job. Surprised senior by age? You already have that info with their job application form. Too senior by experience? I had left the expected salary blank for discussion. If you don't intend to hire, just say you have a better qualified candidate. I understand. But to waste my time and all, just because you're an ISO company and have certain processes to go through. End up having to put back all the certificates at mom's place. Another round trip and 1/2 day gone. Story 12. I think most people wouldn't have experience since interview/join/quit are the only few time you will interact with them. Unless it's some incident that HR going to be involved, then yes, you'll find out HR is not on your side. But my colleague said the HR told her outright that this will be the limit of her salary because of her low education level. Story 13. HR was my regional manager. I worked part-time and told her I want day off 1 week in advance. She say no. I asked her how early should I give? She say 1 month. I asked 1 month in advance. She say no. Short staff. My place, I was forced to clock out at 9 p.m. and work till 11 p.m. I was the cook, the server, the dishwasher, and the cleaner. I asked for a raise from $7.50 to $10. She told me to think about the company. I worked 12 hours a day, 6 days a week. So I walked out. Story 14. HR is long-timer and so is my manager. Once on my off day, my manager sent me paragraphs of long text over one mistake which could be rectified. I went to consult HR and she just told me, "We are like family," and asked me to learn how to tolerate it. I quit shortly after story 15. Anonymous employee engagement survey. Colleague proceeded to use it to air grievances. Even named the person directly she was unhappy with. Was called to drink tea with HR. She asked where was the anonymity. HR said her claims were too serious, the big bosses had to investigate. This colleague lasted 12 years without a promotion. Story 16. I learned to never give negative feedback to your bosses in the company. Don't care if survey is supposedly anonymous or what. Your boss, how duck up. If you value your job, just speak positively or neutrally about everything. Fly under the radar. Story 17. HR once asked my department, in a fit of pique, I guess, "What the heck is wrong with you people?" I replied, "We are overworked and underpaid." You could hear a pin drop after that. Story 18. Encountered one recently on my job hunt. Both positions with the same company in HR. First position, not selected after first round of interviews, ghosted. Only replied after I emailed the hiring manager. Second position, went through 2 rounds of interviews and was offered the position verbally. Follow-up email was sent asking for salary details. But due to my current company not releasing increment and bonus details yet, I sent my expected remuneration with an advertised range instead. Few days later, I was told that the company was moving ahead with someone else, with the HR not being transparent about the reason. They also refused to counteroffer. All in all, super unprofessional HR and hiring manager. In hindsight, I guess I dodged a bullet. Story 19. Golden rule. HR is never your friend, never has, never will. Anyone hired by the company will look after the company's interest. To believe otherwise will be foolish. There is no such thing as anonymity or neutrality. Duck HR, treat them with suspicion/scorn each and every time they ask you for alone time or face-to-face to get feedbacks. Story 20. Anyone hired by the company is hired to make sure your productivity increases or doesn't drop to get you back to work or to prevent you from creating an issue, whether it is managers, coaches, trainers, inspirational speakers, HR, etc. Story 21. HR host a employee lunch and chat monthly. My colleague selected for it, went for the lunch, COO, ask him is there any improvement is needed for company. Colleagues say almost every week need to overtime, but company didn't compensate. Next day, department boss call him to office. After that, he got black marked by the department. Didn't had an easy life until he quit. Story 22. My HR was not even trained on how to be a HR. She was previously a recruiter for about a year after graduating straight out of private university. I compiled a small list of how messed up she was. 1. She was just newly married for a month but had slept with 2 of my male colleagues, one after the other with the second guy being the longest as they remained together even after her divorce a few months later. 2. She tried to blame me to the then boss for failing to make payments on the company's bills when she was holding on to the company's credit card details the whole time. 3. She was stealing petty cash every day in the sum of about $15 to $30, which was found out after she resigned. 4. She used to walk around the office in a bikini and towel during the late afternoons/evenings since our office has a swimming pool below. 5. Convinced my then boss to fire the only competent fella in their management team so that the boss can promote her to get that guy's role, which she did but failed miserably in carrying out the duties. Story 23. I worked in HR of an MNC. Had a meeting with Chief of HR about employee engagement and an upcoming survey. Her words, employees should be glad they still have a job. They're getting paid. I left after 6 months. HR is not your friend. Also, engagement survey is never anonymous unless you get a third party to do it. Even then, big bosses can request frowned upon, but they will still give in to it the person who did the survey. HR is not your friend. Story 24. Well, I asked the HR to bring up my rejection in the social company event that involves alcohol, which I was uncomfortable about, especially when I have not entered a pub before. The HR did assist in this situation, but told me he quitted as the HR for the company. Hence, I would have to deal with a manipulative financial advisor. Thank God, I didn't start the contract with them yet. I just stated my reason for leaving before any legal issue occurs. Story 25. In all the cases that I've heard or been involved with, there's only one of 4 possible scenarios. 1. The day you join as part of orientation. 2. The day you leave voluntarily. 3. The day you get terminated involuntarily. 4. Someone complained against you. HR is definitely not your friend. Story 26. Boomer dumbass boss, sleeping with crazy HR lady who goes maniac on everyone. But he can't fire her because she handles a lot of his paperwork that he refuses to learn how to do, so it's a cycle of suffering for everyone but them.